Some of you guys might not know what I'm looking at right now. This right here is a point-by-point plan for Donald J. Trump to overthrow the government of the United States. And it was written by his lawyer, who has deep ties to the Federalist Society, so a friend of the establishment, a man by the name of Eastman. He's also, pretty distinguished when it comes to law, to be clear. He's not just some crackpot lawyer. So this isn't just some weird, out-of-nowhere conspiracy theorist. He has ties to the larger Republican establishment and, of course, Federalist Society. Now, we're going to go through this in a second, but from this intro, you should know that this seems like an important story. This seems like something that should be plastered all over the place, on every news station, on every newspaper, all over social media, but it isn't. It isn't plastered everywhere. We're going to talk about how that's a problem at the end of this, but I wanted to bring that up before I talked about exactly what this plan was. Now, let's go point by point through this plan to show you very clearly that this was not just some crackpot conspiracy theorist. This was a legitimate, establishment-connected lawyer instructing the president of the United States at the time, Donald J. Trump, how to overthrow the results of the 2020 election and overthrow our democracy. We're going to go by point here before we talk about how it's not being covered and how it's a massive problem. Number one, VP Pence presiding over the joint sessions, or Senate Pro Temp Grassley, if Pence recuses himself. So they even had a plan if Pence decided to, just throw it out the window, because obviously he doesn't believe he has the powers to overthrow the election. Begins to open and count the ballots, starting with Alabama, without conceding that the procedure specified by the Electoral Count Act of going through the states alphabetically is required. When he gets to Arizona, that was point one, here's point two. He announces that he has multiple slates of electors, and so is going to defer decision on that until finishing the other states. This would be the first break with the procedure set out in the act. So you're at point two, and they are officially breaking with historical procedure on how presidents are elected and certified. At the end, this is point three, he announces that because of the ongoing disputes in 7 states, there are no electors that can be deemed validly appointed in those states. To be clear, in those 7 states, we're talking about Arizona, Pennsylvania, the states that it was very clear by the time this was being certified that Joe Biden won, and there was no evidence of widespread fraud. Trump had to fire officials from his administration, particularly cybersecurity officials, for saying publicly this was the most secure election of our lifetime. There is no credible expert that will tell you that Donald Trump won this election, or even came close to it. And we just saw the results of the Arizona audit, and all that proved was that Joe Biden won by even more votes. The idea that he won is completely discredited. The ongoing disputes is conspiracy theory nonsense about Dominion voting. By the way, this is something also that we don't talk about enough, and I'm gonna ask Geek to play some footage of Donald Trump saying these things right here. But Donald Trump, just to refresh your guys' memory, he was doing everything he could to jerry-rig this shit into him being president. Remember when he called Georgian Secretary of State Raffensperger, who manages the election in Georgia, and told him to find over 11,000 votes, just enough so he could win the election? Those votes in his favor, and was asking about Dominion voting and if they switched out pieces, and just telling him to find the votes to make him win? That is him very clearly asking the Georgia government to rig it in his favor and throw democracy out the window. But that's a separate story, only tangentially related, so let's continue. That means the total number of electors appointed, the language of the 12th Amendment, is 454. This reading of the 12th Amendment has also been advanced by Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe. A majority of the electors appointed would therefore be 228. There are, at this point, 232 votes for Trump and 222 votes for Biden. Pence then gavels President Trump as reelected. Boom. Under this plan, at this point, by discrediting 7 states and throwing them out the window and calling it disputed, because conspiracy theorists didn't want to accept the fact that Trump lost Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and the rest of these states, Biden is no longer going to be the next president of the United States. It is now going to be Donald J. Trump. And again, they had a plan for if Mike Pence backed off and said, I can't do this. They were going to have Senator Grassley do it. On point 3, Trump is already reappointed president of the United States. The next 3 points is just keeping him president and stopping the backlash. And he predicts the backlash right here. Number 4. Howls, of course, from the Democrats, who now claim, contrary to Tribe's prior position, that 270 is required. So Pence says, fine. Pursuant to the 12th Amendment, no candidate has achieved the necessary majority. That sends the matter to the House, where, listen to this, that sends the matter to the House. Now remember, before all the new House members were sworn in, the Republicans still had a majority in the House and the Senate. That's important for what I'm about to say. Where the votes shall be taken by the states, the representation from each state having one vote. Oh, sorry, I mixed it up. It's state governments they have the majority of. Sorry, got it mixed up. Republicans currently control 26 of the state delegations. The bare majority needed to win that vote. President Trump is reelected there as well. So, at that point, they're not going off any evidence that Trump actually won. They're not using the actual full amount of votes to prove that Trump won. They haven't uncovered any mass amount of fraud to prove that Trump won. This plan requires literally zero proof that the election was fraudulent. Zero proof whatsoever. All it requires is that the vice president or Grassley rejects the claims, certifies Trump as the next president, and then they pass it to state governments, which they have a bare majority of with 26. And just by having a majority of state governments and the vice presidency or Senator Grassley, they would have Trump again reinstated as president at this point. Let's go to the last 2 points. One last piece. Assuming the Electoral Count Act process is followed, and upon getting the objections to the Arizona slates, the 2 houses break into their separate chambers, we should not allow the Electoral Count Act constraint on debate to control. That would mean that a prior legislator was determining the rules of the present one. This is where the House majority matters. A constitutional no-no, as Tribe has forcefully argued. So, someone like Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, etc. should demand normal rules, which includes the filibuster. That creates a stalemate that would give the state legislatures more time to weigh in to formally support the alternate slate of electors if they have not already done so. That moves us to our last point. The main thing here is that Pence should do this without asking for permission. Let me repeat that again. The main thing here is that Pence should do this without asking for permission, either from a vote of the joint sessions or from the court. Let the other side challenging his actions in court, where Tribe, who in 2001 conceded that the president of the Senate might be in charge of counting the votes, and others who would press a lawsuit would have their past position that these are non-judiciable political questions thrown back at them to get the lawsuit dismissed. The fact is that the Constitution assigns the power to the vice president as the ultimate arbiter. We should take all of our actions with that in mind. Okay, we just went through the whole thing. A lot of big words in there. But to sum it up, basically, the plan was to have Pence or Grassley reject 7 states, even though there was no evidence of fraud, then pass it to the state delegates, the state delegations, not the state delegates, and with them just bare majority of state control, they would be able to overturn the election and then take it to the courts. This was very clearly a step-by-step guide to overthrow the United States government, to completely overthrow it, overthrow the process that certifies presidents with no evidence of fraud, no evidence of wrongdoing, and no evidence that Joe Biden should not be the next president of the United States because he won the majority of electors and, even though this is not important for that, the popular vote. So you would think that this coming out, Eastman's guide for Trump to overthrow the results of an election, would get a little bit of attention. It should get attention. This should discredit Eastman for the rest of his career. And the fact that this was written while Trump continues to be on the campaign trail, rejecting the results of the 2020 election, should discredit Trump himself from running for president again. I mean, let's remember, Trump, and Geek, maybe you can put some footage here of Trump rejecting the results here. But Trump has consistently, from 2015 onward, rejected any time he's lost or rejected the possibility of losing. In the 2015 Republican primaries, when he lost primaries, he would blame it on fraud or some other force, right? Some other force that showed some misfortunate misdoings were going on. Then in 2016, up to the 2016 election, he said he would not necessarily accept the results of the election and was priming his audience for that. He won the election, not the popular vote, but the electors. Then in the lead up to the 2020 election, he said publicly that if he loses, then it's rigged, meaning that there was no scenario where Trump lost that he was going to accept the results of the election. Then he loses. What does he do? He fans the flames of conspiracy theories that he didn't actually truly lose, whether it be with Dominion voting or other nonsensical conspiracy theories, and pressures the state secretary, the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia, to overturn the election by just finding votes for him. Not enough. And this whole list of things that should discredit him forever is another thing that should discredit him forever. Then, of course, we have the events on January 6th. And after the election, after everything was said and done, and all the audits and all the lawsuits went through, and they got their legal clown show, they continue to promote this conspiracy theory about him losing, about Trump winning the election and Biden being the real loser, and it's a fake government, the fake presidency. And now we see that there were also plans to quite literally just overturn the election with no evidence. Again, the reason why this is important is Donald Trump is going to run for president again. It's very obvious from anybody seeing this. He is attempting to get his base fired up for another run. If he has the health to do it. The man is very elderly and he has health problems. And so if a man is going to run again who can't accept defeat, democracy doesn't function. If your political candidates cannot accept defeat and try to fuck up the system like this every time they lose and undermine our belief in the security of our elections, it just doesn't work. It doesn't. And with his cultists taking over the government more and more, whether it be Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, or Madison Cawthorn, who said he was working on putting together another January 6th, and he doesn't want there to be bloodshed, but who knows? And we see Liz Cheney being purged out for just acknowledging the reality that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, and she was the second most powerful House Republican, loses her position for it, even though she voted more in line with Trump. And not only that, but has been a staple of the Republican Party ever since her father helped her get into it. Not that I like Liz Cheney that much. Oh, and this is also on top of the fact that she still supported the voter restriction laws that her party does in reaction to this conspiratorial nonsense. All of this should be covered, but it isn't. In fact, ABC, CBS, and NBC morning and evening news broadcasts have all ignored that then President Donald Trump's lawyers made a memo laying out how Trump could effectively pull off a coup. I believe Seth Meyers covered it, the late night show comedian. So what I'm trying to get at here is that Donald Trump was ready and preparing to pull off a coup. Donald Trump is never going to respect the results of election where he loses, and has shown that again and again from 2015 onward. And the Trump cult has been growing. Not to mention Trump's own personal associations with cults, whether it be Michael the Black Man. Don't even ask me about it. If you really want to know more, just look at blacksfortrumps.com. It's insane. Or the Moonies. But his base of support, the majority of Republicans, believed that the election was fraudulent. A completely baseless lie. And he was ready to rely on that support to attempt a coup. All I'm saying is maybe this news story should be getting a little bit more attention than it is. It's crazy that it hasn't gotten that much attention. Legitimately. I mean, and the thing is, people have dug their hole so much for Trump that let's say you do find this concerning, as anybody with 2 brain cells should. If you've dug your hole for Trump this far, digging yourself out of it is nearly impossible. And it is true that I think a majority of actual elected Republicans right now in the Congress and Senate, in Congress, House and Senate, don't believe this nonsense. A few do, from what I've heard. The majority, though, I hear don't, but are going to perpetuate this lie, making his supporters believe it. And a lot of the people getting elected now are dedicated to that lie, either for political purposes or because they've bought into their own bullshit. By the way, I know a lot of people, anytime I cover a story like this about Trump, people will come to me and be like, Dylan, why are you still talking about Trump? Get over it, right? He is still campaigning right now. He is very obviously getting prepared to run for president again. Anybody looking with their eyeballs should see that. And even if he isn't, the system that he tried to exploit to basically do the government is still something that we should point out. Yeah, it's important to do a post-mortem on his presidency, find weaknesses in their system. Exactly. And let's say that Trump runs again, right? Now, it would be true that if he does run again, it's going to be very difficult for him to put out this specific plan. The main reason being, obviously, the vice president would be Kamala Harris. But a lot of this might depend on who holds the House and Senate. Who knows? You don't think that lawyer could crack something else up if they have the majority of state delegations and they have the House and the Senate? You don't think the Republicans would try to cook something else up? Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tom Cotton, Madison Cawthorn, Matt Gaetz, Paul Gosar, friend of Nick Fuentes, by the way. You don't think any of those people would try something? Or what if we had a repeat of January 6th? Because we all know that if Trump loses again, that a lot of Trump supporters, for good reasons, are going to see this is the last time Trump could ever be president, because no way he's going to run again in 2028. He would just be too old. So you don't think there could be a repeat of January 6th? Not to mention, just look at the Republican opposition to January 6th committee. They stopped it from being bipartisan and made it partisan. They didn't want to participate in it. The majority of the Republican Party, not a minority, a majority of it. Concerning. It's extremely concerning. What about Trump running for Congress and becoming speaker? I doubt he's going to do that. Do I think Joe will run again? I have no clue. You have to ask me in like 2 years.